Hi everyone, I want to give a really quick update about something that's really awesome that's just happened. Last night I found out that a project that I was delivery managing, so that I was in charge of, has just won the UK IT Healthcare Project of the Year for 2020. It's pretty awesome. I'm super happy, I'm over the moon. The team is amazing. What we built was amazing. The NHS staff members we worked with were amazing. This has caused lots of questions about what the service is, how we've built it, and people have been interested in seeing it in practice. I wanted to put this short video together to answer those questions. So, a bit of backstory. What was my involvement in this project? I was the delivery manager, but also a weird sort of product owner hybrid role because this project was just so unprecedented. The project itself is called the NHS Book Virtual Visit Service, and we built it from scratch. We identified a user need for this service at the height of the first wave of COVID in the UK. And when we found out about this user need, we assembled a team within hours to go meet that clear demand for this service within the UK. We built out an alpha prototype of the service within just 48 hours to get it in the hands of real users. And by users, what we mean are frontline NHS staff who are at breaking point, and their patients who are trapped inside of hospitals as all visiting had been cancelled due to the pandemic. We made sure from the very beginning to make sure that all of our code was open source. We did this so that others across the world could benefit from this work too. This was a really critical situation as frontline NHS staff were stretched to breaking point. And unfortunately, some scenarios such as patients dying without being able to say goodbye to their loved ones. The NHS Book Virtual Visit Service was built to address all of these clear needs that were developing at the height of the COVID pandemic. Slightly earlier in the year, I presented at a digital festival. Due to COVID, it had to be online. So I'm going to switch over to a recording of that now, so you can see just a little bit more about what the service is, some context behind it, and also a live demo. I hope this helps. To the COVID pandemic, all visits inside of wards were cancelled. The wards themselves were locked down. That meant that patients felt stuck and not able to see their loved ones. It also meant that, unfortunately, patients were dying alone without their family there to say goodbye to them. The NHS staff were also completely overwhelmed, physically, psychologically, and emotionally. So this webinar is a story about how we tried to help. This was an incredibly challenging situation for the NHS and for the UK to find themselves in. But we tried to help by building an open source virtual visiting solution. This allowed video calls from anywhere in a hospital ward to a loved one anywhere in the world. It was provided at no additional cost to the patient themselves and did not collect onerous amounts of personal information. So the impact on things like privacy and governance was minimal, and ultimately meant that the NHS staff members were able to serve and help the patients that they had in front of them. So let's recap. What did we actually do? So within 48 hours, we built an alpha to get something into the hands of users very quickly. This alpha was open source from the very beginning, utilizing the best work that the NHS Digital Service Manual has, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. From the very start, this was focused on user needs. At some points of the project, we had hourly feedback cycles with real NHS staff members on the front line who were telling us not only what it was like at that time inside a ward that was closed down with patients dying around them, but also how we could help them by perhaps different features or a different flow within the service. We started off by rolling this out into 1 or 2 wards. Then we went slightly further into multiple wards. After that point, we started tackling multiple hospitals and then multiple NHS trusts. And Ian in a second will talk about a bit more about that. So what did the NHS Book of Virtual Visit Service achieve? So I like to think about this in 4 buckets. Firstly is the technology side. As I mentioned previously, this was an open source piece of technology that facilitated crucial conversations between patients and their loved ones via video. We also managed to get an alpha done and something out there within the first 48 hours. And we made sure that it was always user-led. We weren't prioritizing features because of, say, a requirement stock. We were prioritizing features because we were hearing it firsthand from our users. The second bucket I like to think about this is the metric side. So far, the service has facilitated over 8,000 video calls. That's 8,000 conversations between patients and their loved ones, which might not have happened. The calls themselves average over an hour in length. This shows to me and to the team who have worked on it how critical these conversations are. These aren't quick 15-minute catch-ups with somebody. These are in-depth, emotional conversations. 6 months after launch, we're finding ourselves with about 40 visits per day. We were a bit worried that with wards opening up before future possible waves of coronavirus or other pandemics in the future, we had thought that perhaps usage of this tool would just cease to exist. What we found was that it serves a real need, even with wards being open for visiting. The third way I like to think about this is the scope of the project. So this NHS Book of Virtual Visit Service is rolled out into 6 hospitals. That's more than 50 wards across the NHS that have access to this. It's proven out that we can work in new agile ways of working, both for frontline NHS staff, but also for the back office IT teams, which are the backbone in supporting hospitals, the patients, and the NHS's needs. It's also allowed the NHS trusts which have rolled this out to be prepared for future pandemics or future scenarios in which visiting is not achievable. The final bucket of which I like to think about this is outcomes. Ultimately, we had happy users. Both NHS staff members on the front line were happy, and also the patients themselves. What we see here is not a stock image. This is a real life photo taken of an NHS staff member inside of a hospital using the NHS Book of Virtual Visit Service to facilitate a conversation between their siblings who were inside of the same hospital with COVID symptoms. Even within the same hospital, even being an NHS doctor, you weren't allowed to communicate with each other in person. So you can see just the utter joy on this individual's face. This really works. So before we dive into a little bit more about what we've done and how it's impacted the likes of Kettering Hospital, I'd like to show you a bit of a live demo. Wish me luck. So what we see here, imagine this rendering on an iPad for a frontline NHS staff member, perhaps a nurse on a ward or a ward nurse. They have their iPad or similar device and they're walking around the ward and they can see the calls that are coming up today. So for example, we have Paddington Bear talking with Cher later on today. That should be a really interesting conversation. This list screen allows NHS staff members on the front line, nurses in wards, for example, to be able to see where the devices need to be at certain times to facilitate these conversations. It also ensures that personal information isn't shared where it's not needed. For example, you don't find out any more about this conversation that patient Marsha P. Johnson is having with Diana Ross. Again, an amazing conversation, unless you click into it or tap into it on an iPad, and then you're displayed with some more information here. So Let's go through the flow of booking a virtual visit. Before scheduling a visit, the NHS staff member is just prompted that there are a few pieces of information that they need to collect prior to being able to schedule the visit. This is just to ensure and give a heads up to the NHS staff members that they're able to have all of the information together to start a visit. So I'll tap start now. Next, we're displayed with a fairly typical list screen. Let's work through these. So we start with the patient's name. Let's just say this is my name. Next, we want the key contact's name. In this setting, a key contact is usually displayed on a patient's records, and it's their loved ones or their family or their friends or their partner, but the individual who the patient trusts most in the world. Let's just say that's Laura for this example. Next, we utilize an integration with GovNotify, the government's central notification service for all text messages, emails, and letters. We've chosen not to integrate letters here because we didn't feel like it needed it, but we have the ability to send a notification to this key contact, the patient's loved one, via text message or email. For the sake of this demo, we'll just send an email. The NHS staff member is then presented with the ability to book into the future. It defaults to today. Based on user feedback, we found that most of our calls on wards are scheduled either just before or just after the doctor's rounds in the morning. This is a peak time for use of this service, so we've defaulted it to the current date. In terms of the time, again, based on user feedback and analytics, we've been able to identify that most calls happen relatively quickly. If you put yourself in the shoes of a potential user of this service, you can imagine how at the time you might have a patient who's perhaps just about to pass away and they want to schedule that call relatively quickly with the patient's family and loved ones at home. So we've defaulted it to 10 minutes in the future. For the sake of this demo, that's fine for us. Next, we have a check your answers screen. This is a fairly standard screen within the NHS's design standards, but it's just an opportunity for the NHS staff member to check some details about the key contact, specifically things like the phone number to make sure it's not a 6 instead of a 9, and to ensure that the email address is indeed correct. Next, we press book visit. After this has happened, again, as I mentioned previously, based on user feedback, we found that a flurry of these is done on wards in the morning. So based on that feedback, we built the service or a feature to enable very quickly booking of another virtual visit that skips the first few steps of that cycle that you've just seen to speed up and improve the workflow for an NHS staff member. For the sake of this demo, we're just going to view virtual visits. As you see here, we now have a call starting in a few minutes' time, and it's between Jessica and Laura, and we have the correct information here. The NHS staff member can start, edit, rebook, or cancel that visit. Originally, we only had start, but based on user feedback, the ability to edit, for example, to move a patient between different wards, to rebook, for example, to head off the fact that they might want calls in the future, and also cancel. So let's start this visit. In terms of information governance, we don't hold an onerous amount of data within this tool. So we just ask the NHS staff member before handing over the iPad or similar to the patient to confirm a few critical pieces of information. That the person joining is indeed the person we expect it to be, that they can tell the NHS staff member the patient's name that they're expecting to talk to, and also give the patient's date of birth, which is a fairly common piece of information for the correct person to know. I'm going to stop my video on Zoom quickly so that it will appear on the screen, and then click Attend Visit. And then Join Meeting. So what you can see here, apart from myself and my amazing cat next to me, is what's happened is once I click Start Visit, it sent a second text message or email notification to the key contact. This gives them a unique URL so that they can join. So once they do, here we go, and then we can wave and say hello. And again, this is an amazing face-to-face conversation that we can make full screen on an iPad, perhaps if we need to, and then we can take the conversation in any way we wish. After the call is finished, thanks, Laura, we click End Call. At this point, we found that the patient is often with an iPad or similar device, and they want to be able to hand it over. I'll just start my video here again so you can see me. Hi. They hand the iPad or similar device back over to the NHS ward member or NHS nurse. That conversation typically is based on user feedback has been, wow, that was an amazing conversation. It's been perhaps the first time in a few days or a few weeks that that patient has been able to talk with the people who they love most in the world. And the most requested thing from a patient is to rebook that for the future. So what we did based on that user feedback is built this feature of rebook another virtual visit. So I'll tap this quickly. This pre-populates all of the fields that we saw earlier and just defaulting to the next day at the same time, so that the NHS staff member who's incredibly busy and we're trying to improve their workflow just needs to click continue, double check that it is indeed the correct information, and press book a virtual visit. If I go back to the main list screen, if I go to upcoming calls, you can see that there's a call in here, and there's also a call with George Clooney. Given we've completed this call, if I go back to the screen, you can see that it's very easily displayed to the end user that this is indeed completed. And 24 hours in the future of this call being completed, all personal information is removed from the service. Only the fact that the call happened is kept, and the length of the call is kept as an anonymized piece of data to ensure that we know how useful this is for individual wards. I'm going to log out of this service now and show you briefly the admin console side that is used by the back office IT teams. So if I log in as a trust admin, here you see real life data from Kettering General Hospital Trust. You can see the number of booked visits they've done, the average visit time, and the average visits per day, along with the average participation per visit. You can see here that it's quite high. This shows how valuable this service is. If we go into the hospital themselves, Kettering has one hospital, but you can imagine perhaps an NHS trust which is slightly larger would have multiple hospitals being listed down. You can then see the number of total wards and the number of booked visits. If Kettering were to build a new hospital, perhaps, the admin staff, the IT back office admin staff would be able to very easily add a new hospital and take it on from there. We also integrated fairly recently the ability for a key contact. So in the demo you just saw, that was my colleague Laura. When Laura had clicked finish call or end call at the bottom, they were displayed with an option to give feedback in the form of a survey. This will give us additional information and insight into perhaps why the call was taking place or their views on the call itself, how useful that was for them. We also have the opportunity for a NHS trust at a hospital by hospital basis to input their support URLs. This is perhaps if they have a patient support service or PALS within their local hospital, they can direct the key contact or the loved one and their family to the correct amount of information. So that's it for the live demo.